When my daughter invited me on a family vacation, she said I could come if I paid my own way. So I smiled and said, "No thanks." But 20 minutes later, my phone lit up with over $12,000 in flights, hotels, and spa charges on my card. That was the day I learned generosity without boundaries becomes an invitation to be used. When my daughter, Gwen, called about our family vacation, her voice had that cheery, calculated tone I'd learned to distrust. I've been a widow for a decade, and at 65, I've built a quiet life. My house is paid off, my routines are set, and my patience for family drama is gone. "We'd love for you to come with us," Gwen said, sighing as if inviting me was an act of saintly generosity. "But, Mom, you'd have to cover your own expenses. You know how the economy is. In our family, this is what they called fairness." My younger son, Tyler, and his wife, Blair, were going too. Their airfare, suite upgrades, and spa bookings were always absorbed by the family budget, an imaginary fund that somehow came from my pocket as loans never paid back. My presence, apparently, required a lesson in financial independence. "No, thank you," I said. No anger, no drama. I just sipped my chamomile tea and looked out at my garden. "I think I'll stay home this time. Enjoy the trip." There was a pause on the line, the kind of silence that's really an insult in disguise. "Really?" "Well, if that's how you feel," my daughter replied coldly before hanging up. I figured that was the end of it. I got up to start dinner, peeled carrots, chopped an onion, and put water on to boil. Then my phone on the counter lit up with a notification. Then another. Then another. They were alerts from my bank app, airline tickets, deposits for a luxury resort, full-day spa packages, over $12,000 in charges I hadn't authorized, all processed in the last 20 minutes. For a split second, I thought a stranger had hacked my account. Then I opened the details. The flight bookings had specific names: Gwen, Tyler, and Blair. Years ago, I had let Gwen save my card in the family travel account after her divorce. I had trusted her enough to forget about it. Clearly, she remembered it better than I did. I stared at the screen. I wasn't surprised. And that was the saddest part. For years, my family had mistaken generosity for weakness. Tyler had borrowed my card for emergencies that became new gaming consoles. Blair always forgot her wallet at dinner. And Gwen justified it all by saying, "That's what family is for." But this crossed a line. This wasn't manipulation. It was theft dressed as family. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't call my daughter for an explanation or beg my son to cancel anything. I was done begging for respect. With steady hands, I sat on my kitchen stool, opened my banking app, selected the first transaction, and hit Dispute Fraudulent Charge. I did the same for the rest. Then I went into security settings, toggled Freeze Card, changed my passwords, and ordered a new card. The system confirmed the funds would be held pending the bank's investigation. It took less than 10 minutes. No lawyers, no lawsuits, no courthouse scenes. Just a few clicks gave the power back to its owner. I turned off my phone, tucked it into my apron pocket, and went back to the stove. The water was boiling. I dropped the pasta in, enjoying a peace I hadn't felt in years. Now, I just had to wait for them to reach the airport. The first message came the next morning while I was watering the hydrangeas by the porch. It was from Gwen. "Your card is getting declined at the airport check-in desk. They won't let us through." "What did you do?" I looked at the screen, wiped water off a leaf, and typed back, "Exactly what you suggested yesterday. Gwen, I'm just paying for my own expenses." My phone started blowing up. I put it on silent and left it on the entryway table. For hours, the screen lit up with calls from Gwen, Tyler, and a furious text from Blair accusing me of ruining their year. Their hotel bookings had been canceled for lack of a valid payment method, and the airline had flagged the reservations before boarding passes could be issued. The dream vacation was over before they made it through TSA. That afternoon, a car pulled up hard in front of my house. Tyler and Blair dragged out their suitcases, faces red with indignation. They had been so confident the vacation would be paid for that they had already rented their apartment to tourists for 2 weeks. Blair had planned to use that money as trip spending cash. Now the trip was gone. Tourists were in their apartment, and they had nowhere to sleep. They walked in using the spare key Tyler had always kept. "I can't believe you did this to us!" Tyler yelled from the hallway, dropping a heavy suitcase that put a nice scratch in the hardwood floor. "You humiliated us in front of the whole airport." I was in my reading chair, a book open on my lap. I looked up, expressionless. The only person who used someone else's money without permission was you, or your sister. If you stay here, the rules are simple: clean up after yourselves and respect my space. Otherwise, the door is plenty wide. Blair narrowed her eyes, expecting me to fold under the guilt of seeing my son on the street. But I didn't budge. From day one, Blair decided to punish me by taking over my territory. Since they couldn't go to the resort, my house became their personal hotel. The next morning, I woke to a trashed kitchen. They'd used my cast iron skillets for eggs and left them in the sink. Blair sat at the dining table, scrolling on her phone and drinking the imported coffee I saved for special occasions. "Morning, mother-in-law," she said without looking up. "The Wi-Fi is a bit slow. You should really call the company. And by the way, there's no almond milk in the fridge. Tyler only drinks that now. In the past, I would have sighed, grabbed my keys, and driven to the supermarket, feeling like a stranger in my own home, desperate to keep the peace. But that woman disappeared the day I saw those $12,000 in charges. I didn't say a word. I grabbed a damp cloth, wiped down the counter space I needed, brewed my own cup of tea, and made myself toast. I sat at the far end of the table, enjoying my breakfast, in total silence. Blair scoffed, clearly annoyed by my lack of reaction. "Are you not going to clean that?" she asked, gesturing toward the dirty pans. "I didn't use them," I replied softly. "When you're done washing them, please make sure to dry them well." Cast iron rusts. I got up, washed my cup, put it away, and retreated to my bedroom. That same afternoon, while they were out for a walk, complaining about how boring my neighborhood was, I took action. I went to the local appliance store and bought a small mini fridge. I installed it in the corner of my bedroom and spent the next hour moving my cheeses, my good coffee, the fresh meats, and my favorite desserts into it. The only things left in the main kitchen were rice, beans, some veggies, and tap water. Blair's scream from the kitchen carried all the way to my room the next morning. "Tyler, where is all the food? There's nothing here but onions and a box of cheap pasta." I walked out of my room, already dressed for my morning walk, and passed by the kitchen. The two of them were standing in front of the big fridge, which was now painfully empty, with the door standing wide open. "Mom, what happened to the food?" Tyler asked, using that confused little boy tone that, at 32, was just pathetic. "Did you do a clean-out?" "No," I answered, adjusting my scarf in the hallway mirror. "I simply adjusted the house budget. As you know, I had to deal with a bank fraud attempt recently, so my finances are strictly under control. That's the community pantry. But we can't just eat white pasta, Blair protested, crossing her arms, her controlling attitude crumbling at the lack of creature comforts. We're your guests. You're adults, I corrected her, not raising my voice. If you want something else, the supermarket is 3 blocks away. I'm sure you have your own cards to pay with. Since you were apparently planning on going to a luxury spa, I left them there. Speechless, I went for a walk in the park, feeling the fresh air in my lungs. I knew exactly what Blair was doing. Her tactic was always to make me feel like the family's service provider, the emotional and financial maid. She wanted to force me back into my role as caretaker, because that's how they kept me in line. But the rules had changed. I was the homeowner, the bank account holder, and the one with the keys to comfort. When I got back home an hour later, I found Tyler eating a bowl of white rice in silence, while Blair stared out the window with a scowl. If the food was the first blow to their comfort, transportation was the second. My son, Tyler, had always assumed my car, a very well-maintained sedan, was an extension of his own property. He'd take it without asking, burn through my gas, and bring it back with the tank on empty. That Wednesday, Tyler had an appointment to look at a new business project, something he claimed would change their lives. I saw him heading downstairs, adjusting his collar. "Mom, I'm taking the car," he announced, heading for the ceramic bowl by the door where I always kept my keys. He reached in, but the bowl was empty. He frowned and rummaged through the old receipts inside. "Where did you put the keys?" I was watering my indoor plants with a small copper watering can. "The car isn't available." "Tyler, what do you mean it's not available?" "I need it now. I have an important meeting." Blair took her car keys by mistake, and she's not answering her phone. "I took it to Don's garage this morning." I explained quite naturally, plucking a dead leaf off a fern. I decided it was a good time for some preventative maintenance. Oil change, brake check, tire rotation. He said it'll take a few days, maybe a week, since I'm in no rush. Tyler looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "But I need it." "Why didn't you let me know?" "Because it's my car." "Tyler," I said, turning to look him in the eye, holding the watering can firmly. "I don't have an obligation to check anyone's schedule to keep my property in order. I suggest you call a cab or walk to the bus stop. The number 4 comes in 10 minutes. His face went from frustration to disbelief, but he couldn't argue. There was no shouting, no fight he could win. He stormed out and slammed the door. I smiled lightly and went back to watering my fern. The weekend came, and Blair decided that if she couldn't control the kitchen or have luxuries, she'd at least impose her social presence. Without asking me, she invited 3 of her friends and my daughter, Gwen, over to spend the afternoon at my house. I returned from my weekly errands to find my living room turned into a social club. They were drinking cheap wine, laughing loudly, with their shoes up on my light-colored sofa and the TV blaring at a deafening volume. Gwen saw me walk in and looked away, still annoyed by the trip fiasco. Blair smiled smugly, as if she had conquered the territory. "Hi, mother-in-law. We decided to have a little get-together to lift our spirits," Blair shouted over the music. They expected me to get flustered, to retreat to my room feeling displaced, or to make a hysterical scene that would make them look like victims. I did none of those things. I walked with firm steps to the center of the room. I dropped my bags on the floor. I walked straight to the main outlet behind the cabinet and unplugged the TV and the sound system. Silence fell heavily over the room. "Excuse me, ladies," I said, in a tone that was cordial but sharp as steel, addressing Blair's friends. "It's my downtime, and in this house, shoes are not allowed on the furniture. I'd ask you to lower your voices, or, better yet, continue your lovely gathering in a public place." Then I turned to Blair. "And if you spill a single drop of that wine on my sofa, The professional cleaning bill will be coming out of your husband's bank account. I took the TV's power cord, coiled it up calmly, and tucked it under my arm. Blair's friends looked at each other, uncomfortable, and started grabbing their purses, murmuring excuses. In less than 5 minutes, the room was empty. Blair was left alone, red with humiliation, with no audience to play the victim for. The next morning, I noticed something unusual in my study. My desk chair was slightly pushed out, and one of the drawers where I used to keep my bank statements wasn't completely shut. They hadn't stolen anything of value, but the message was clear: they were searching. They wanted my new credit card, or maybe some financial document that would let them justify that I owed them money. Maybe they were looking for the emergency cash I kept. Their desperation was clouding their judgment. What they didn't know was that since the day I froze the card, I'd rented a safe deposit box at my bank. All my important documents, my updated will, my backup cards, and my jewelry were safe there. In my desk drawers, there were only appliance manuals and old grocery receipts. Still, I wasn't going to let them feel like they had the right to dig through my privacy. That same afternoon, I went to the local hardware store. I bought a smart door lock with a keypad. I didn't need to call a specialist. The instructions were simple, and I've always been handy with tools. In half an hour, I swapped the old knob on my study bedroom door for the new one. When Tyler tried to get in that afternoon with the excuse of looking for a pen to sign a paper, he ran into a solid metal keypad. I heard the frantic tapping of the buttons from the hallway. I came out of the kitchen and found him standing in front of my door, his hand frozen in midair. "This area of the house is private now." "Tyler," I said calmly, handing him a cheap plastic pen. "Here's your pen. When you're done using the guest bathroom, please turn off the light." He stared at me. It was in that moment I noticed the reality was finally hitting him. I was no longer his unconditional, self-sacrificing mother. I was the homeowner, and they were simply unwanted tenants who were about to run out of time. The time had come for them to leave, but I wasn't going to beg. And I wasn't going to waste another afternoon arguing in my own hallway. I simply stopped rearranging my life around people who had no respect for it. Thursday morning, at 7 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. 3 men in work coveralls walked in, carrying paint buckets, plastic tarps, and electric sanders. They were from a renovation company I'd hired the week before. I led them straight to the guest room where Tyler and Blair were sleeping. I threw the door open. The couple jolted awake, disoriented and half asleep. "Good morning," I announced with an energy I didn't feel but projected perfectly. "Rise and shine, please. The painters need to get started." "What painters, Mom? It's 7 in the morning." Tyler stammered, rubbing his eyes. "That's right. I've been meaning to turn this room into my sewing and reading room for a while. The cream color is boring me, so we're painting everything a linen shade, and they're going to sand the floors today," I explained, while the workers started covering the furniture in heavy-duty plastic, ignoring my occupants. "But we have nowhere to sleep!" Blair shrieked, clutching the sheets to her chest as the sanding dust started floating through the air. "The sofa in the living room is quite comfortable if you put a blanket on it," I suggested kindly. "And I'd recommend you pack your clothes in your suitcases so they don't smell like chemicals. The work will take about 5 days. There will be a lot of noise. I apologize for the inconvenience." I left the room, closing the door halfway so I could hear the chaos. The electric sander fired up with a deafening roar. I smiled. There's no arguing with a homeowner making improvements on her own property. Some people don't learn from lectures. They learn when comfort disappears. They lasted through the noise and the smell of paint for exactly 24 hours, sleeping on the living room sofa, eating white rice, and having to walk to the bus stop was just too much for my son's ego and my daughter-in-law's arrogance. Friday afternoon, I watched them dragging their suitcases down the hallway. Blair didn't even look at me. She was typing furiously on her phone, probably complaining to her friends about what a terrible mother-in-law she had. Tyler stopped at the front door. "You didn't have to treat us like this," he said. His voice didn't have anger anymore, just a mix of defeat and chronic victimhood. "We're family!" "Exactly, Tyler. And family is respected," I replied from the hallway, arms crossed. Vacations are paid for, loans are paid back, and homes are treated with respect. When you understand that, we can grab a coffee, have a safe trip home. I didn't wait for him to answer. I closed the door gently behind them and slid the bolt. The next morning, I called a locksmith and changed the front door lock. Tyler's spare key had worked once, and once was enough. Peace. I had learned. Should never depend on someone else being decent enough to return a key. Later that night, Gwen called. Surely to give me a speech about how I destroyed the family unit. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. I had no obligation to listen to complaints from people who tried to rob me. My house was quiet. A deep, clean, absolute silence. I walked into the kitchen, prepared my dinner using the good ingredients from my private fridge, and sat down to eat in the living room. The workers had left for the day, leaving a faint but fresh smell of new paint. There was no grand celebration. There was no movie-like reconciliation where everyone learned their lesson and cried in a group hug. The reality is, my family will probably never understand the damage they tried to do. But for the first time in my life, that didn't matter anymore. I'd set a clear boundary, built not with empty words, but with unwavering actions. The control was mine, the peace was mine, and this house, finally, belonged entirely to me.